All right, back for another wild and exotic adventures of a wasp. We have some college stories. We're going to try to do a bunch here in a row, kind of knock some off, make them kind of short and sweet, but good stories. Let's start. Most of these take place at college at Cornell. Let's go with golf shop robbery.
All right, the golf shop robbery. I'm telling you a story with some trepidation, but it's a very true story. By the way, all my stories are true. The names are changed to protect the innocent, and sometimes they're changed to protect the guilty. But in this case, it was graduation weekend. I was not graduating, but my friends were. And at that point, we lived in the house out in Nakiga Heights, and we had acquired a new roommate. We didn't know him very well. But the night before the graduation ceremony, he went and broke into the pro shop at the Cornell golf course and stole a lot of stuff. Sets of golf clubs and everything. And he showed us all this loot he had in his trunk. And he said, I broke in, I'm graduating tomorrow, I'm off, they'll never catch me. Well, you know, that haunted me for a long time. In fact, it still haunts me. As to what I should have done. Should I call the police at that point?
Did you take any of the stuff?
No, I didn't take any. Nobody did. He just left. Boom. He graduates the next day, takes off for where he was from. But you know, that haunted me. My roommate there was also Don Anderson from Jamestown. Don T. Anderson. I was Don C. At our 50th high school reunion, we were having a beer, and he said to me, do you remember the night that guy robbed the pro shop? And I said, I sure as hell do. It's bothered me ever since, as the fact that we did nothing. We knew about it, and we didn't call the cops, and we let this guy get away with it. He says, it's bothered me a long time, too. Obviously, it's too late to do anything about it now, but...
But that night, did you sort of grin and, haha, that's great? Or how did you feel about it when he told you? Like, hey.
First of all, we were amazed. We were absolutely astounded. This guy was so open about it. I mean, he's a normal guy. God, we're playing baseball and everything with him. But then he comes back, he robs the golf course shop, and was very nonplussed about it. And I often said to myself, you know, what was my duty? Obviously, my duty was to call the cops and turn my friend in, but I didn't do it. And well, I've thought about it ever since.
Well, now it's come out in the podcast. You've come clean.
I guess so. I guess so.
Your soul is now clean.
And I never saw the guy again. He's probably dead by now. I don't know.
Well, he could be, still playing in the senior tour.
That's right.
All right, tell me about the first football game you went to.
Well, you go to college and you have these... you think you're going to be going to football games and dating the girls and riding back convertibles and going to fraternity parties, and that's what college life is all got to be about. Well, the fact is that I went there, I had practically no money, so I had to work. And they had an office at Cornell where you could go and find jobs. So I went there, and they said they have a job. They want somebody to help put in a driveway up in Nakiga Heights. Well, up there you could almost see the football stadium, and with everything was going on there. So I went up there, and the guy said, "Look, I got a bunch of rocks up there, and I got these sledgehammers. I want to hire somebody to bust these rocks up, so I can use them to surface the driveway. I'll pay you." Back in those days, God, it was probably $2 an hour or something. So being another guy, we did that. The day of the first football game at Cornell, I spent the day busting rocks, and I could hear the band playing, everybody having a great time. And I said, so this is college, huh? I'm busting rocks, and they're down there having a great time. So it was a great lesson.
What about waxing the floor story?
Oh, that's another funny. Another job I got was helping out. There was a woman who had an elderly mother who had Alzheimer's, I guess, And they hired me to kind of be a handyman. I would go there like an afternoon a week, from noon till 5. Well, I did that. Finally, they ran out of things for me to do, so they finally said, "We want you to wax the living room and the dining room floors." So I would go there every week, and I would lay down paste, and I had this heavy brick, and I'd work and work and work and work and get it all waxed, shiny and smooth. The next week, I'd do exactly the same thing. In the meantime, this senile grandmother, I guess she was, "You missed it over here. You missed it over there. Come over this." She would kind of direct me everything I had to do, and I cursing on my goddamn son. But they paid me fairly good money. I waxed that floor for like 10 weeks in a row till it finally was like an ice skating rink. But I mean, when I think about what I thought college life was going to be, I'm busting my back trying to earn enough money to stay there.
Now you're also a waiter, right? And there was a little episode with ice cubes.
Right. I got a job working the Sigma Chi house as a waiter. So they had maybe, I don't know, 50, 75 members who ate, and my job was to bring the food from the kitchen into the dining room. Well, then occasionally I called them for special duty. They had, big party weekends, and the members would have dates, and they would have dinner at the fraternity house. So we made a practice of, we had dinner rolls, and then we put dishes with butter and put some ice cubes on it to keep the butter hard. And so then we served whatever we had, probably roast beef or whatever. So in the process of trying to clear the table, one of those dishes with the butter on it, the ice had melted. So it was ice water. And I went and very gently picked it up. I was lifting it up. Somebody came and bumped my elbow. I dumped the whole dish of ice water down in the décolletage of one of the dates, who was wearing a very low-cut crown. She screamed and jumped up. She had this cold water. And here I am, flustered, trying to figure out what to do next.
You didn't go right and try to wipe it off with a napkin?
No, I kind of felt it. No, I didn't do anything. I just stood there like a dummy while she ran and got towels, got herself trying to clean up this about a pint of water that is ice water.
Buttery water.
And it spilled down the front of her dress.
What about the wine opening incident?
Well, I then worked for a while at the hotel school at Cornell. Has a very nice restaurant there, and it's manned by students who are going to hotel school. And some of them are chefs, some of them are waiters, and I got a job there. Although I was not in the hotel school, I got a job there as a busboy. And so I worked there several weeks and got to be pretty good at being a busboy. And then one night they said, "We're short a waiter. We need somebody who can step up and be a waiter tonight." So they said, "What about you, Anderson?" And I said, "Geez, I'm willing to give it a try." So I got my order pad. And I went out there and took an order. I think there were only 2 people at this table. But they ordered dinner and whatever it was, and then they ordered wine. And I said, "Okay, I'll be right back." So I went back and got the wine, got the right bottle. And I'd never opened a bottle of wine before in my life. So I got a corkscrew, and I went out there, and they were kind of looking at me, expecting a kind of a level of service, that you think you get at a hotel school. God, I ground that thing, and I turned it, and I couldn't get that cork off. Finally, I screwed up. I think I tore the cork into about 3 pieces. I finally, boom, and got it out of there. I poured their wine. Each glass, there were about 5 or 6 corks floating around in the top of the wine. So they called over the maitre d', and he kind of hustled me out to the kitchen, get somebody else in there more experienced, to get him the right glass of wine. And then he finally chews me out, and he says, "My God, you're going back to being a busboy." So from then on, I was a busboy.
And there's a final exam story about music, I think.
It was kind of a coincidence. One of the best courses I ever took at Cornell was a music course called The History of Music. And we studied music from the Gregorian chants through the Baroque and the Romantic period and the modern period. And I really loved that. I love music, and I really loved that course. We studied opera. We studied 2 or 3 operas, and it was great. I just loved it. But then it came time for the final, and one of the professors said, "I want you to emphasize the difference, the similarities, and the difference between the Rake's Progress, which was an opera, I think, by Stravinsky, and I think it was Don Giovanni by Mozart." And he said, "I want you to tell in this take-home exam the differences and the similarities." So, I'd gotten to know those operas pretty well. I thought I could maybe handle it. But later on that week, I was studying. Cornell had separate libraries. They had a central library, but then whatever school you were in had their own library. So I was in the ILR library, which is the school that I attended, the Industrial and Labor Relations School. And I was sitting there right next to the stacks, and I noticed a book in there about music. And I said, it doesn't fit in the ILR library. They were reading about labor law and all that sort of stuff. So I took it out, and there in the book was an essay about the similarities and the differences between Don Giovanni and the Rake's Progress. There it was, all laid out before me.
So you made use of that. You didn't exactly.
Well, I debated about it. I said, should I read this and do it? But then I said to myself, well, the professor was being pretty lazy because he obviously got the same book. It's all laid out here. He didn't want to think about it, so why the hell should I? So I copied it down. I got an A on the final in music.
You copied the essay in the book? Or
I didn't copy it, but I copied all the points. This is similar, this is not similar.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I came out the best mark I ever got at Cornell. I got a straight A on that. I don't think the professor ever figured out how he knew that, but that's what I did. Well, I'm proud of that, but he did.
Well, I used to do something similar in some of the English classes, Shakespeare, for example, is we'd be studying Macbeth or Hamlet or whatever on any given morning. It was a 8:30, maybe even 8 o'clock class, probably 8:30. But the library opened at 8, so we'd be studying Macbeth. I would have a cup of coffee at 8, run over to the library, pick out a book about Macbeth that was some scholar had written about the duality of purpose of Lady Macbeth.
Yeah.
And I would just jam in on that, like that. And so as we sat down, Dr. Pollard would start the class, do some interview. He'd say, does anyone have any opinions? And I would raise my hand. I'd say, I'm very intrigued with the duality of purpose of Lady Macbeth, the way that she represents both the good and the evil. And he would say, yes, Steve, you're correct in that. And then he wouldn't call on me the whole rest of the class. Now, I would learn a lot, but that was my one trick. I'd be the first one to raise my hand, sound really smart.
You think he ever caught on?
I don't think he ever caught on. He was the kind of guy. And quite frankly, I kind of came away being educated by that because it was just quick. It was always a good point.
Yeah.
I would go through books quickly. Oh, here's something good about the duality of purpose or the world view of King Lear.
Yeah.
How whatever. But then he would talk about it for a while. He was a smart enough guy that he'd explain whatever this guy in the book was talking about.
Now, I thought you studied there with Professor Sutherland.
Sutherland was, I did. He was more of a not basic English teacher, but more of a language teacher. But Dr.
And
Pollard,
writing, yeah.
It was always had to do with literature. Any literature course you could go in, find some scholarly thing, but it reminded me of that. So,
yeah.
Well, we have a couple more stories here. One's a not so. It's not a funny story, but about your friend Ernie.
Yeah, very, very sad story. We were all freshmen, and, it's your first taste of this stuff, and the competition was absolutely fierce. We had a bunch of very, very bright people got into Cornell, and I was intimidated by them, and a lot of people were. So there were 3 of us who kind of formed a bond. And there was one kid from New York City named Ernie who, His father, I think, was in the plumbers union or some union, and they gave a scholarship every year to a kid, and Ernie got that scholarship to come to Cornell. So the other guy's name is Gil. So we'd sit in these classes, and Ernie had a lot of difficulty keeping up. You know, he could listen, but he couldn't take notes. So he would copy our notes. So I'd be writing away, and in the process of doing that, I would say, Ernie is an asshole. And he would kind of copy that before he realized what was going on. And then Gil would do it. And this kind of went on for several weeks before Ernie kind of got into it. Well, lo and behold, the pressure was so great. We had a course then called industrial process or something. We went on field trips. And we went on one, I think, to a steel mill up in Syracuse. Ernie didn't go. And lo and behold, we came back and we found out that Ernie had committed suicide. He had jumped off one of the bridges at the gorges at Cornell. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's not an unusual occurrence at Cornell. It happens a fair amount. But I'll tell you, it was really a very shocking thing to all of us. Well, the next thing we know is about 2 or 3 weeks later, the dean calls myself and Gil into a meeting with Ernie's parents. And he's got these notes of Ernie's that were in his books. And they point out to the fact that he had written there that Ernie is an asshole, something about you don't pay attention enough, use your stuff, and all that writing in there. And they asked us what that was all about. So we had to very laboriously explain that was kind of a joke that we played on him, and no way do we mean any harm or anything. I'll tell you, it was one of the saddest experiences of my life. The poor parents were absolutely heartbroken about this whole. Their only son, who had gotten into Cornell, big deal, got the scholarship, and then jumped off the bridge. It was an absolutely horrifying experience for everybody involved. It was terrible.
As far as you know, were there any extenuating circumstances that?
No. I think they were trying to think out some way we had motivated them to do that. But I think we finally convinced them that it was all a big prank and a joke. So pretty sad.
Yeah,
pretty
sad
stuff.
Story.
Yep.
Well, what about? Let me wrap this up. There's a story about the dean.
Oh, quickie. I was a freshman at Cornell in 1954. No, 51. 51. And that year, a new dean of the university had been in place. His name happened to be Dean Waldo Malott.
So he was Dean Waldo Malott.
Yeah. His real name was Dean, but he was also the dean of the college.
Mm-hmm.
So the first couple of days I was there, we had the big ceremony on what we called the live slope, and he gave this great speech about the future and what it would have held for all us Cornellians and the history we're all bringing forward. And it was a very eloquent speech. We all came away pretty much impressed. Well, lo and behold, about a month later, there's this little blurb in the New Yorker magazine where they quoted what he said and what somebody else had said at a university about 10 years before that. He stole the exact same words. A classic case of plagiarism. And this was this new guy. I don't think he ever paid a price for it, but he was extremely, obviously, embarrassed by the whole thing.
I can guess so. Well, last question before we wrap this up. How did you decide to go to Cornell? You went to Cornell. How did that decision come along? Did you have other choices? What got you to Cornell?
You know, I have a very vague recollection of that. When I was in high school, graduating, I looked at a number of colleges. At one point, I was kind of intrigued with Ohio State. They had some kind of a program there for some. Oh, I know what happened. I do know what happened. I had a great English teacher. She was Mrs. Zangi. Everybody loved Mrs. Zangi. And she got me aside one day and she said, my brother is going to Cornell in this new program in a new school called the School of Industrial and Labor Relations. It's a state school and it's designed to train people to work in labor relations personnel work. And I said, God, that sounds intriguing. So she arranged for me to get all the materials from Cornell. And
It was a state school?
yeah, there are 3 state schools at Cornell. The ILR school that I went to, the Ag School, and this, we used to call the School of Home Economics. But that meant they were part of Cornell, but they were sponsored by New York State, so you didn't pay the normal Cornell tuition.
Okay.
You paid another kind of tuition. So that got me started. I got accepted, I think, out of high school, which blows my mind to this day, how I got accepted. But I managed to delay it for a year because I had no money. My parents couldn't afford to help me out very much. So I worked for a year, put some money in the bank. Next year, boom.
So do you consider it an Ivy League education? Do you describe it that way, or is it
Absolutely. I mean, my diploma says Cornell University.
So there's no palpable difference between the state side
No.
and that. So, all right. Well, we covered a lot of ground there very quickly. Some good, quick stories, and that's it for this one. We'll wrap it up, and we'll be back for more.
Super.